Hey guys, this video is for government class. It was really nice to meet a lot of you guys today. Some for the first time, some are old friends. Some of us have been together, go back a long way. So I'm really looking forward to the semester with all of you. So remember, like we're gonna have our classes obviously on Monday and Thursday. Then our asynchronous days are Tuesday and Friday. On the asynchronous days, I will either leave a video, leave an article, or both. Like today, I'm going to leave both. Because we have a weekend and we want to hit the ground running. So I'm going to leave this video and then I'm going to leave two articles for you guys on Google Classroom that I really want you to read. One from the Atlantic and one from Vox. The article from the Atlantic by Adam Serwer, who's a great writer, actually says just how bad the situation in the United States really was by January 20th, in terms of the damage to democracy that had been done for the past 5 years. And he gives real world examples and kind of challenges those who dismiss people who think that the past 5 years, weren't so bad at all. Trump's gone, so it didn't really matter. But a lot of damage was done, and this article talks about that. The article from Vox I'm going to leave for you actually talks about, how the Electoral College gives a built-in advantage to Republicans, particularly, a populist type Republican like Donald Trump, who had very strong appeal among white working class voters. Apparently they've cracked the numbers, but a Democrat has to win 52% of the vote at least in a national election to have even a 50-50 chance of winning the presidency, because of the Electoral College. So that is a very ominous, possibility, right? That we can consistently have the loser of a presidential election win the presidency because of the way the Electoral College is. Oh, sorry about that. The way the Electoral College is organized. So that's a good article I want you guys to read as well. So this video and those two articles I'll leave on Google Classroom. Okay, so we were talking in class about all the ways that the United States government structurally is not democratic, right? There are a lot of things about the United States government. We talk about all the other problems, the greatest threats to democracy and to going forward, but one of the biggest that's not discussed as much as it should be is that last thing I had in that list: structural deficiencies within our own government that makes anti-democratic elements and anti-democratic feeling much stronger than it otherwise would be. There are structurally parts of the United States government that are undemocratic, and that situation has been exacerbated in the past few years. I gave you the example we left off in class talking about the fact that the United States Senate, in and of itself, is very undemocratic. The fact that every state has two senators, in and of itself is a very undemocratic thing, right? California is 67 times the population of Wyoming, which we talked about in class, yet each one of those states has two senators. Just to compare that to the situation in 1787, the biggest state in terms of population was Virginia, the smallest was Delaware. Virginia only had 12 times as many people as Delaware. So now the biggest state and the smallest state have 67 times the difference in population. And then some other shocking statistics. By 2040, which isn't that far off, that's only another 20 years, half the United States population will live in 8 states. So, and they'll only have 16 senators. So half of the United States population will only be represented by 16 senators. 8 other states will have 20% of the population. So what that basically means is just doing the math. 32 senators will represent 70% of the population. 32 senators. 68 senators will only represent 30% of the population. So that is not democratic, right? That one of the two houses of Congress is basically going to be dominated by people in the smaller states. That is a really big problem. 42 states will have half of the U.S. population. So that means they'll have 84 seats. So 50% of the population will have 84 seats. The other half of the population will only have 16 seats. That's that's a really big concern, especially the fact that many of the smaller states are overwhelmingly white, right, and overwhelmingly Republican. So that's going to create a built-in advantage for the Republicans and for white conservative voters going forward, right? That's going to give them a really big boost in terms of influence on national policy, even as their numbers diminish. This, you could argue, is long-term the biggest threat to really progressive policy change. The way the United States is structured. Now, what can we do about this, right? If you think that this is a concern, maybe some people don't, but if you do think it's a concern, then some possible solutions include giving statehood to more places. Like, for instance, Washington, D.C., right? Why isn't Washington, D.C. a state? They have to pay federal taxes and they get no representation in Congress. Puerto Rico, basically a colony. The Pacific Islands, right? We still have colonies in the Pacific Islands. We have Guam, we have American Samoa, the Mariana Islands. So do they get representation? What about the American Indian tribes? Should they get any representation in the United States Senate? So if these entities actually got more representation, that would actually balance out the numbers a lot more, right? And that's why Republicans fight so hard against granting statehood to any of these new entities, particularly DC. Right? DC is overwhelmingly Democratic. It's a majority black city, so it would presumably elect 2 more Democratic senators, and the Republicans do not want that to be a possibility. So Chuck Schumer, the new Senate Majority Leader, actually said that it is a priority for the new Democratic Senate to actually try to put DC statehood to a vote. But as long as we have the filibuster rule where you need 60 votes, that's going to be a very difficult challenge, which gets me to the next undemocratic element within American government, but within the United States Senate itself, and that is the filibuster rule. You need 60 senators in order to pass almost anything in the United States Senate. Now, a little bit of background. Now, we're going to be talking about all of the things we're talking about in this video. We're going to be talking about them in a lot more detail going forward. But the filibuster rules, so there's just going to be a few minutes on the filibuster. That started as a way to close off debate. So basically, if somebody just keeps talking and talking and talking in order to run out the clock so a bill isn't passed, you would need X number of senators to kind of cut off debate and begin a vote. Now, the filibuster historically has been very rarely used. In 1960s, only 7% of bills were actually filibustered. And almost all of those bills were civil rights bills because the Southern senators were so opposed to those that they filibustered them. They kept talking and talking in order to try to run out the clock and stop the Senate from voting on them. So the history of the filibuster actually is very ugly. It's rooted in Jim Crow and protection of segregation and and trying to deny Black Americans their rights. So the thing is that that's the roots of it. But in recent years, certainly in the past 12 years since President Obama became president, the filibuster has been used routinely on every piece of legislation. So it became almost like accepted that you need 60 votes in order to pass anything. And you don't even need to talk and talk and talk. That's what a filibuster is supposed to be, right? Where somebody actually gives a speech and keeps talking and talking until the bill dies. But now you just have to threaten the filibuster. And unless 60 senators vote to stop it, the bill doesn't pass. It's like it is really crazy. Between 70 to 100% of bills are filibustered in the United States Senate, depending on the year. That is absolutely extraordinary. And during the Obama years, every single bill was filibustered by the Republicans that President Obama wanted. President Obama actually had Democratic control of the Senate for 6 of the 8 years he was president. But it was almost impossible for him to pass anything really after his first 2 years because of the filibuster, even though the Democrats had the majority. This is a situation where you could say this is completely untenable. We basically have ground our entire government to a halt, paralyzed it, made it impossible to actually get any sort of legislation passed at all. Is this an acceptable situation going forward? It's not. I don't think. Some of the defenses of the filibuster I find very weak. Some people actually say, well, we need the filibuster in order, well, we might not be in the majority one day. You might be in the majority. So I want to stop you from being able to pass anything. But just unpack that for a second. I want to stop my ability to pass anything if I'm in the majority because I want the ability to stop you from passing anything if you're in the majority. That does not seem like a formula to actually have a working government, right? It's kind of a recipe for disaster and chaos. So the supermajority that's needed to pass legislation creates a permanent obstacle to actually passing any legislation. We're going to talk about this in a lot more detail when we talk about the powers of Congress. But the thing is that there's only one exception. I know what you're thinking. What about Biden's economic recovery plan? Isn't he going to try to pass that with only 51 votes? The one exception to the filibuster is a process called reconciliation, where, if you say you're going to pass a piece of legislation that's going to have a budgetary impact, you can call it reconciliation, and it only needs a simple majority to pass. But the problem with that is that it can only be used once a year, and it has to be shown that it has an effect on the budget. Like Biden is trying to include a minimum wage increase in his stimulus plan, but I don't think that's going to fly because Republicans and others will argue that, well, that has not making the minimum wage higher doesn't have a budgetary increase. You can make a case, maybe it does, but it's going to be a tough case. So after that initial bill, the reconciliation bill, my feeling is that Biden will probably, and the Democrats will probably get this legislation through reconciliation, the $1.9 trillion economic stimulus plan. But after that, it can only be used one more time. Biden, I would assume, is hoping to, the Democrats are hoping to use that to try to advance other Biden priorities. But remember, there's only 50 Democratic senators plus Kamala Harris, so they literally can't afford to lose any Democratic senator. Any one of those senators could actually mean that they can't pass something through reconciliation. And it has to have a money impact. So all the other things the Democrats want to do, expanding voting rights, trying to have more pro-environmental policies, gun control, you name it, the list goes on and on. The thing is that it's going to be virtually impossible to actually pass any of that legislation because of that filibuster rule. And I think that it's long past time. I'm going to start a new book. It's about how the United States Senate is basically blocking anything from happening. This is the book. I'm free plug here. Kill Switch. I haven't started it yet. I want to start it this weekend because I know I'm going to be talking about this, so I want to be even more prepared. And I'm also very interested in this topic anyway. And just basically saying that if we want to move our country forward, the only way to do it is to get rid of the filibuster. So let's see if that happens. Now, the Electoral College. Again, we're going to talk about all these things in a lot more detail going forward. The Electoral College gives some states a much bigger stake in national elections. In 2016, that's twice in the past 20 years, the loser of the popular vote has been elected president because of the Electoral College, right? George Bush in 2000 and Donald Trump in 2016. Certain states have disproportionate influence. Only some states matter at all, right? Like at least 40 of the states, that's 40 of the 50 states, basically we know how they're going to vote almost immediately, right? As soon as the election starts, we kind of know some states will be Democratic, some states are Republican. So they're completely ignored. So basically, that includes very Democratic states like New York and very Republican states, right? Are just written off, saying, oh, well, we know how they're going to vote. So that means the presidential elections often boil down to maybe 10 states. And these 10 states, margins can be exceedingly narrow. And I gave you the example in class, or at least in one of the classes I did this, where basically, Joe Biden won 7 million more votes than Donald Trump, but his victory came down to only 43,000 votes in Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona. So just these three states, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia, basically 43,000 votes combined in those three states are the reasons why Joe Biden won the election. Donald Trump would have been reelected if his 43,000 more votes had gone his way. If 43,000 Biden voters decided to stay home, It would have swung the election to Trump, even though Biden got 7 million more votes. So just think about like what that means going forward, right? It also has very racial elements to it as well, right? Because, classist elements, because the states that often wind up being the decisive states are ones that are overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly less urban than other states. Um, so the Republicans actually have a built-in advantage just in terms of the way the government itself is structured. In the case of the United States Senate, the Filibuster Rule, and the Electoral College. So these are structural problems within democracy itself, within our democracy, that are threatening and harming the democracy. The role of the courts. Some people mention this in class, that the role of the courts, you could argue, is undemocratic, right? When courts rule something, it's pretty much an uncheckable power, right? Like no one, except for a constitutional amendment, which is very hard to pass, but a court rules something, and that's especially the Supreme Court. Well, it's the Supreme Court definitely. Then that is it, right? Then that could mean that the courts could actually be ruling things. Oh, the book I like just fell down. The courts could actually be ruling things that are completely at odds with what the American public wants. And believe me, I think that's a situation that we're going to be encountering a lot in the next few years. Because there's a 6-3 conservative majority now in the Supreme Court after Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. And my feeling is that we haven't been hearing much about the Supreme Court, maybe with everything else going on, but a 6-3 conservative majority has the ability to overturn a lot of initiatives that the Biden administration, the Democratic Congress, want. And that's going to force a reckoning. A lot of people, especially on the progressive side, are really going to become, understandably angry about this, because they're going to say the American people completely support X legislation, and the courts are just striking it down. So we're basically, the conservatives will have a veto on American law, for decades to come. And that's something that is, you could say is very, very undemocratic. Now, going back to the last president, for instance, Trump's attacks on the press, on the judiciary, his stranglehold basically on the Republican Party, where basically it's kind of a one-man operation, the Republican Party. The Republicans had no platform in 2020. They just said, we're going to keep America great and continue Trump's policies. Like literally there was no Republican platform, but apart from Trump worship. So the thing is that that's very undemocratic, right? Sometimes we kind of took a lot of Trump's lines as kind of like throwaways. Oh yeah, he's calling the press and the enemy of the people. Oh, that's just Trump. That's very serious, right? Because basically he's urging the people, particularly his own supporters, not to listen to the press. Right? That he says you can't believe what you see and hear in the press. You can only believe what I'm telling you. That's very undemocratic. His attacks on judges, right? When he said, well, the judge is Mexican, so he's not going to give me a fair ruling as I'm building a wall. And other attacks of that nature, really undermine confidence in the system. And also the fact that, I have my political beliefs, you have yours, but one of the things that's very important in a democracy is to have two strong political parties, right? To have differing policy visions, right? Democrats want to do certain things, Republicans want to do other things, right? And then it's up to the American people to decide which vision they believe in. That's important to have two strong national parties. But when you have one national party that basically doesn't really even offer that many policy ideas and is basically just, a vehicle to support one man, that is very undemocratic. And I don't know how that situation is going to change, because the thing is that Republicans to this day, even after the insurrection, still support Donald Trump. So we'll see where that goes. Now, the last thing I want to just kind of throw out there, this question: can frustration with democracy actually lead to less democracy? The answer to that is an absolute yes. It does. A lot of people see the system just doesn't work. The rich people, the special interests, just seem to get all the advantages, right? All these structural problems we talk about, the way that society is changing, like people's assorted frustrations the fact that the minimum wage hasn't increased in so many years, the fact that so millions of people don't have health care, the government bungling the coronavirus response, a lot of these things, a lot of these problems within government actually lead some people to just lose faith in government and often turn to people who do not really believe in democracy. Now this, because they say, well, this isn't working, so we have to try something else, even if that person is offering something that's completely at odds with democracy, period, which might make things worse, but is understandable. Right? One of the, political scientists will be spending decades studying what exactly happened in 2016 and how Donald Trump won the presidency. But one critique that I find, very compelling is when people argue that because the American government was not working anymore for regular people. So that made people desperate and just kind of looking for any solution. So it actually made them more likely to support somebody who's a radical break with a system that they don't believe in or that's not working for them. And they're right in many ways that the system is not working for them, right? The system really, has a lot of problems in terms of actually helping regular people, and that's been the case for a very long time, and that can actually lead to a further erosion of democracy because democracy itself doesn't seem to be working. It's kind of a understandable feeling. That's kind of happened around the world throughout American history. One of the big reasons, especially like in the 1930s, in Europe, one of the big reasons why a lot of these European countries turned to despotic leadership, turned to fascism, is because the democracy they had just wasn't working. So it made them more likely to actually become less democratic as a response. All right, guys, very good. So remember, watch these videos from start to finish. I'm going to have 2 articles. I'll post this link on, if you've watched to this point, then, you found the video. So, but I'll post the link for this video on Google Classroom as well. And then I'll post the 2 articles I want you guys to read over the weekend. So again, it was great meeting you guys and being reintroduced as well. We're going to have a great semester together, and I will see you all on Monday. Have a great weekend. Peace.